Hey guys, this is the second book review of Sakuraba's book, Doku-sou-ryoku. Here it is. Doku-sou-ryoku, just going over his the part that he talks about, where he talks about mixed martial arts, and I'm gonna do a couple more, but maybe even do a book translation. That'd be really fun. That would be a fun little project for me to do on the side. Anyways, in the last, I took notes this time. Lots of notes, because last time I feel like I didn't do a really good job kind of rehashing over the stuff. But as I was taking notes, I realized, man, I'm writing down every single sentence, because everything that he's saying in here is really good. It's kind of a narrative style book, and so it's just him kind of talking. It has a sense that he's just kind of talking to you, and so it's really easy to read. But when you're taking notes and thinking about what you're going to talk about, or to kind of reflect and talk about in a video review or kind of a video summary, you realize everything in here is good stuff. There's a lot of little golden nuggets hidden in each sentence. Just to recap, in the first kind of introduction to MMA, his introduction to MMA, he talks about continuity. Making one technique, not just so an armbar isn't just an armbar, but it's one fluid movement to transition from the armbar to a choke, to taking the back, to maybe back to the armbar. I thought that was very insightful. I think a lot of times we think about just one move and we don't necessarily see the progression, or we don't necessarily think of it as a continuity. So he talks about connections, and he talks about that being ideal. Another theme that he talked about in the previous, that I talked about, that he talks about, Sakuraba talks about, is being prepared to go to the next step, and kind of anticipating their defense and beginning to make your transition in that direction. Very cerebral approach. You're anticipating and thinking about their movements. We talk about chess and thinking a move ahead. How he explained it was very, to me, the chess concept doesn't sit too well. It doesn't, like, I can't relate well with it, even though I like to play chess. When he explained it, kind of thinking of how they're going to defend, and then you turn your body, or you begin to set up your next move based on their defenses. That really made a lot of sense to me. And ultimately, not being so invested in one way to get the finish. I think sometimes maybe you're like, oh, I'm a back take choke guy, I'm a armbar guy, I'm a toe hold guy, right? He says I'm maybe invested 80 to 90% in a specific move. What I'm really looking to get is the finish. And my finishes are set up by not being invested, not being 100% invested in that specific position, but being ready to be continuous, having kind of a fluid movement, being connected from one submission to the next submission. So I thought that was that's kind of a quick review of what we talked about. Again, like a lot of golden nuggets, a lot of real insightful knowledge, just in, I think, maybe 6 pages of his book. We're going to move on to the next section on MMA and just what he has to say. This section was a little bit longer, and so I'm going to be talking a little bit more, but just hang with me. There's a lot of good information about training, good information about kind of an analytical approach. Again, Sakuraba's nickname is the IQ wrestler, probably most well known as the Gracie Hunter, but his initial name was the IQ wrestler because he was kind of a lighter guy who had to gain weight in order to be competitive. But his thing was, I'm gonna analyze the position, and I'm gonna find my an answer to the question. I'm going to find an answer to this problem and be able to set myself up to get the victory. I'm going to be looking down at my notes because I took notes this time. Anyways, so he talks about that continuity, and in judo there's this thing called Kazushi. Kazushi is also known as like where you like break somebody down. Sometimes we call that a setup. In wrestling we call that a setup. So Kazushi or a setup, it has to do with offsetting your opponent's balance, getting them off balance. Maybe a fake could be a part of your Kazushi, but he says in judo maybe there's a 1 or 2 part Kazushi to set up your move, right? So a good example would be if you're doing a throw, you got to pull them forward. If you're doing a throw that takes them backwards, you're going to pull them forward, right, and get their weight to come back. But maybe they'll defend or get their weight to come forward into you, as opposed to having them, you know, be straight up and down in balance. But maybe they'll defend that and they'll lean back, and so then you take them backwards based on that Kazushi. So that Kazushi is a 1 or 2 part move that's setting you up, and I'm sure it gets more complicated. But Sakuraba says, you know, he continues to do the Kazushi 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and as a result of doing that, he realized people really disliked it. People dislike being set up or being like off balanced all the time. And so he's like, so then I continue to do with that. And what I notice is their breath begins to shorten. They begin to breathe, have an irregular breathing pattern. They're no longer in their rhythm. They're off rhythm. So he does this Kazushi, Kazushi, Kazushi. If it's not working, if it's not really setting things up, he'll change an angle and try and attack from a different angle. And then he'll just repeat that process. If that attack isn't working, then he'll Kazushi, Kazushi from there and change the angle, try and attack from, or try and break them down or set them up, off balance them from a different angle, and attack from a different, with a different perspective or a different idea in mind. And it's just a continuous process of that, right? And he's figuring out where their weaknesses are, where their strengths are, what they're more kind of susceptible to in the fakes, where they're defending really hard, and so you can tell that he's like analyzing his approach. He's like a raptor trying to analyze, and these are my words, but I see his explanation as him being kind of like a raptor, not a rapper, a raptor, you know, really figuring out the prey's weaknesses. And he says, you know, doing this Kazushi makes you tired, but when you realize that it's making your opponent even more tired, then that motivates you to keep doing the same thing, to continue with that breaking them down. And he says that's the competitive mentality that drives me. You know, having that kind of mindset is a competitive mindset. He says that is his style, and I'm pointing to me as though I'm Sakuraba, but that's his style. I think I identify a lot with that because, you know, he was a wrestler and I was a wrestler, and I identify with that mindset. You know, that attacking, breaking them down, wearing them out, in order to expose a weakness or expose an angle that you can attack from. Let's see. So from a visual, he's like, and he explains, he's like, I try and think of myself as not being necessarily head and shoulders or way high above my person, way high above my opponent. I'm just trying to be just a slightly above that person. If I can just stay slightly above them, then I can stay ahead of them. And I thought that was interesting. I think sometimes in the West, you know, we have to be so over the top and so kind of we have to demonstrate this like supreme kind of masculinity, maybe, if you will, in order to make up for our lack of or not just to make up for our insecurities, you know, or if we're in a fight situation, we need to just be over the top, you know, loud voice, puffing up our chest or whatever. But Sakuraba explains it, you know, he's like, I just want to be a little bit above the guy. If I know I'm a little bit above the guy, then I can get the edge and I can get the win. a couple other things that I'm just going to go through that I wrote down. He's like, what you do in your training, you will do in your fights, you will do in your matches. So you can't expect yourself to do something that you haven't done in training. And how you train is going to be a reflection of how you fight. And the message in this part of his chapter, he continues to emphasize the importance of consistency and consistent repetition in order to create a habit. So he talks about the importance of sticking to something on a daily process, or being having a process, having a system, right? Maybe for you, a casual jiu-jitsu player, it's 2 to 3 times a week. For a professional MMA fighter, maybe it's 7 days a week, every single day. And he says, like, well, that sounds like super difficult, right? That sounds like something really hard. But he says all you need is 10 to 20 minutes of really focused, disciplined energy to create a habit. You just need 10 to 20 minutes a day to create a habit, but it has to be focused. And I think that in that he talks about the continuous repetition makes it a habit. And otherwise, without that continuous repetition, you're gonna forget. You're gonna lose touch with what it is, that technique, or you're gonna lose that momentum to be able to execute the technique. An example that he gives is in Japanese. There's a writing system, and you have kanji. Kanji is like the Chinese characters of Japanese, and I kind of equate that to our spelling. If you the way he explains is if you're not writing and you're using your phone or your PC, your laptop to send emails and to do all your writing for you, you eventually forget how to write the characters. And I think there's kind of the same thing. If we're always relying on autocorrect and our spelling correct on our computer or our phone, then we kind of eventually forget, how to spell, or we forget about grammatical rules, because we're not handwriting. And there's been studies that show that handwriting ignites a different part of the brain than you would just writing, let's say, on a PC or typing would. That's really interesting, something to look into. But he says, but if you choose to write a little bit every day, if you do some writing for 10 to 20 minutes every single day, then the amount of characters, kanji, that you forget dramatically decreases. So you're not forgetting as much if you just make it a habit to write every single day. I think the same thing is with spelling. If you hand wrote something every day, maybe you keep a journal, a handwritten journal, you write a letter or whatever it is, 10 to 20 minutes every day, I think you're going to realize that your spelling is going to kind of maintain itself, and that diminishing factor kind of goes away. So that was his example when talking about creating a habit, just 10 to 20 minutes of really focused energy as something very productive. And then he goes off and he talks about his fakes, and how sometimes he says something, he does certain things that people are confused by, and they don't see the intent in it. And he goes to explain his Mongolian chop. The Mongolian chop was a crowd-pleasing, kind of an exciting technique, but he says he does it with reason, and he did it because it worked. The newspapers took it up as something ridiculous, like he's not taking it seriously enough. But and Sakuraba has been kind of controversial because he does this kind of outlandish, crazy-looking moves. But in his mind, there is a reason for it. There's intent. He's not just doing it and he explains. He says, "I'm not doing things just for the sake of pleasing the crowd. Everything that I do has an intent to set up the fight. Maybe it's a fake, maybe it's a crazy move, but everything that I do has an intent to set up the fight." And he goes on to talk about the Mongolian chop and how that's a fake. When you're on top and you're kind of doing that ground and pound and you're striking your opponent, they're clinched up and they're defending themselves. He's like, unless you're the bigger, stronger person, you're not going to be able to win that striking battle. So he would do this Mongolian chop, and the way I visualized it is him coming out from the side and hitting kind of the side of the neck, right, with both of your hands. And he says that gets your person to open up, right, and defend, and then from there you can go back to hitting, you know, the middle of the body, without needing to be the stronger person. You're able to, you know, precisely punch without them defending. Another example that he talks about is the Muhammad Ali Antonio Inoki fight. That was like a big controversial fight, because Muhammad Ali was supposed to fight this professional wrestler, and then moments before the fight took place, in an MMA fight, mind you, moments before the fight took place, they said that the rules became that unless they were on the ground, Inoki wasn't allowed to wrestle with Ali. So on the feet, they were allowed to strike, but until the fight went to the ground, Inoki wasn't allowed to do anything but striking, I think. Sakuraba doesn't talk about that. Anyways, but so Antonio Inoki came up with this crazy strategy to pull guard, and he just kicked and kicked and kicked Muhammad Ali's shins until they were black and blue. His shins and his thighs until they were just completely black and blue, to the point where Ali couldn't even stay up on his feet. And I think either they ran out of rounds, or the Ali's team threw in the towel. Muhammad Ali's team threw in the towel. I can't recall how the decision was made, but and I can't and it might have been that they went 15 rounds and Muhammad Ali got the decision. Anyways, look it up. Antonio Inoki versus Muhammad Ali. A crazy MMA battle. And anyways, he talks about that position and how Sakuraba, he's talking about and the Mongolian chop, and this move that I'm going to talk about right now, the flaming top, right? The top meaning like top that you would spin, that spins around. And you call it the flaming or like the burning top, which is where they're in the guard, like the Antonio and Ali fight, the Inoki Ali fight, and Inoki was on his guard with his feet up, kicking Ali's legs, and you see, so Sakuraba comes up with a technique where you can grab their legs and you spin them kind of in a circle, and if they're not wearing any shirt and they're naked, then the back rubs against the canvas, and you start creating this this friction starts creating, like almost like you're burning your back off. So he called that the flaming top. But all this comes about, and then he talks about how when he trains in the gi, he's never had any formal gi, gi training. So he grabs the gi in weird places, and you realize, oh, like their opponent not liking it. People who are used to training in the gi, not liking it. I think you kind of equate that to Keenan's worm guard. People not being familiar and not liking that they're grabbing the lapel in certain ways. But all that comes around, the Mongolian chop, the flaming top, grabbing the gi in different places in weird ways, is a way to is his strategy, or his theory is that if you figure out what people dislike, then that is your strategy to win. And if you stick with something from there, realizing what they dislike, and you create, you can find a new move, or you can find a technique, or you can find a way to attack from those from that disliked kind of a position, then you're gonna have something that's very powerful. And that's his theory, or that's his strategy in attacking. And so he says, and now it's important, once you realize what it is that people dislike, that you try it, you do it all the time. So you drill it, you practice it, you do it in competition, you do it when you're sparring, and you do it constantly, and you create variations based on that. in Japan there's a phrase, you hit the iron while it's hot. You know, you have to hit the iron while it's hot, otherwise you can't mold it, you can't bend it. And he says, you know, the technique is the same way. If you don't use it all the time, if you're not using it, it's gonna go away. In order to make it a habit, you have to be practicing and using it all the time. So he says, so go out and use it, right? And the last thing, just to kind of finish up, the last thing is, so he says sometimes he won't be in training and he'll be walking around, or he's outside of the academy, and he starts to think of a move, or he starts to think of something, right? He says, write it down immediately, especially if you're in a position where you can't train it. He says, he uses his cell phone. I think that's is something that we can all definitely. I just started using my cell phone to take notes because I realized I can't remember stuff either unless I write it down. And when I write it down, at least I can refer back to it. Sometimes I don't need to refer back to it, but if I can't remember the specific details, then having that, and sometimes I'll even do a video. I'll do a video of myself talking into it to remind myself about certain things if I can't, if I don't have the comfort to write something down. Maybe I'm driving or something. Even like you know, Sakuraba is known for kind of these crazy, cool entrances into his MMA fights from his professional wrestling days. So he'll wear a mask, or he just has some really cool like entrance ideas. And he says if he thinks of them, he'll write them down. If he thinks of a joke, you know, he'll write it down, or if it's a joke specifically for somebody, he'll call that person and tell them that joke anyways. He says maybe they think that I'm just like, he's like, maybe they think it's funny, maybe they think I'm just annoying them. He's like, but he's like, if you get an idea, why would you waste an idea and just let it pass, you know, especially if it's a good idea. So he's like, if you get an idea, don't wait and don't sit on it. Go out, use it right away. Call somebody, send them an email, send them a message, send them a text message, you know. I thought that was really cool, because otherwise I think, and it's true, just in life we kind of get caught up in our day-to-day. We get caught up in so many things that if you don't act on a certain thought right away, then it just kind of disappears, and when you try and recollect it or recall it, it's not there anymore. So I thought that was something that I could apply into my life, my day-to-day, just kind of following through with stuff that I think of and just doing it right away, even if it kind of interrupts my day a little bit. The message of this little section is continuous repetition, right? Follow through with your continuous repetition, just 10 to 20 minutes a day. 10 to 20 minutes a day of focused repetition, focused continuity is going to help you create a habit. And once you have a habit, or you can't create a habit. Habits don't happen unless, I'm glad I took notes. Habits don't happen unless there is repetition, unless there is continuity, right? So have a system, right? For me, 3 or 4 times a week maybe, where you're focused on doing a certain skill. Maybe for you it has to be every day, but have a system within your life where you can have continuity, where you can have continuous repetition. I think this is really powerful, and I think it's a big part of why Sakuraba got his name, the IQ wrestler, and I think why he was so successful transitioning from wrestling to professional wrestling to mixed martial arts. Even you know, in his 40s, he's doing MMA bouts at a very high level. His body's beat up, but you can tell that his technique is sharper. He's more crisp. He has better strategy, and he's fighting his opponent not with power and strength, but the strength of strategy, the strength of technique and mind. That's a very powerful thing. I think we can all incorporate that. If you're already strong physically, great. That's an asset of yours. But you can always become mentally stronger. You can always be more strategic. You know, I think it's like limitless. You know, the mind is really limitless. Strategy is limitless. So use that to your advantage. It's something, according to Sakuraba, all it takes is 10 to 20 minutes of continuous repetition, and you will have it. So good luck, guys. Give me some feedback. Let me know if you want me to continue with these, and especially with Sakuraba's series. I'm going to move on to a couple more different books after I do maybe 2 or 3 more. I'll talk to you guys soon.